of the many, many interviews you've done over your time, and particularly with world leaders, which ones impressed you and you walked away with a different point of view as a result of talking with them?
Well, the most important interview I ever did was when Anwar Sadat became the head of the Egyptian government. And he was the unexpected leader. The government had been run by the military, a cadre of 5 generals. He was the least of those, expected to be go to the top upon, in this case, the death of the fellow who was running the country. But somehow or other they picked Anwar Sadat. And everybody who had any knowledge of Egyptian politics felt with certainty that they were putting him into the job to remove him as soon as they could decide who would be the general taking over, because he was the weaker one of that. Well, so they pointed him, and everybody assumed it was a temporary thing. He didn't start out doing anything of any great importance. But since nobody really understood him, I decided I would get the first television interview with him. I was always kind of fascinated with Egyptian and Middle Eastern news. So I went over and got this interview. He granted it to me. And I flew over and sat down. We sat down under the banyan trees with the flies and mosquitoes all around us. And his smoking his pipe, and I smoking my pipe, the one thing we had in common at any rate. And it was boring. He was talking about what he was going to do with Egypt and all that kind of thing. And he droned on and on. And I had been up all night flying, and I could hardly stay awake. My eyes were closing. And then I suddenly thought I heard him say, "And I shall go to Israel." And I said, I couldn't have heard that. I said, excuse me, did you say you were going to Israel? Yes, Wولter. I shall go to Israel. When are you going? He said, I will go anytime. My gosh, I had quite a story. But then I said, well, what are the conditions? He said, well, just as soon as they get out of the Sinai, and and that all the whole litany of things that the Egyptians wanted out of them. So I didn't have a story at all, and I went home and reported this stuff. But I didn't report that. It wasn't an interesting story. It was it just wasn't anything of importance. However, it turned out that he was repeating that to some people, and not so long after I had been with him, a Canadian delegation was visiting the Middle East, the Canadian parliamentary delegation, and they were in the hall as he was speaking to his Congress, to his thing, and in it he said, and I shall go to Israel. And they had to leave to catch a plane to go to Israel themselves. So they never heard any contradiction of that or any conditions for it. But when they got to Israel, they started spreading this around, that he had said he was coming to Israel. Well, that got a lot of talk in the press, in Israel particularly. And that was on a weekend. So as soon as I got in for the evening news on Monday, I called up my new friend Sadat, and I said, there's all this talk because this Canadian delegation was there when you made a mention. I said, what are you going to go to Israel? Yes, Wولter. I said, well, what are the conditions? Well, just as soon as they get out of the Sinai, the same old stuff. So I said, well, then those would be your conditions for going to Israel. He said, no, Wولter. Those would be the conditions for peace. I would go anytime. And I said, would you go today? Yes, Wولter. And I said, well, you probably would need an invitation from the Israelis. He said, yes. They would have to invite me. And I said, great, thank you. Well, we immediately got on. My producer already was getting on the air. We got to Begin, the head in Israel. And I got him on a telephone, a wire, and told him about this. And he looked like I'd hit him in the solar plexus. He looked like he was breathless. He said he would come here, and I said, yes, well, tell him to come, tell him to come. And I said, well, I think he would need an invitation. Tell him he's got an invitation. I said, well, I can't tell him that. It's up to you to tell him that. Well, you can do it. I said, well, I can't do it. And he said, well, I'll get it done. I'll have your American embassy do it. They'll do anything we ask them. I'm sure he said that. People later said they didn't hear him say it, but I think at any rate, they indeed invited him. I told him that he could come that week, and that was Monday. And he said, well, I want him to come. He must come, but I can't have him come this week. I've got a meeting in London with the Prime Minister. Never mind that. That's not important. Tell him to come. Tell him. So he came. And that was the beginning of the rapprochement. Right. That it still goes on to that degree. Sadat was a very brave man to do that. And indeed, it did cost him his life. I'm sure he was assassinated by some of his Egyptian radicals. And a great shame, because I think one of the greatest things that's important in a politician is political courage. And when it takes courage, the leaders must exercise that courage and do what they know is right. Now, I'm not talking necessarily about physical courage, but political courage. And there are not enough of our leaders and other leaders in other countries that have that courage.